2 years later, he's coming home with a heart full of longing and a locket resting over his heart. But what he finds are closed doors, cold faces, and the absence of the one he loved most. Now, he must confront buried truths and repair the silence that nearly cost a life. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. The bus swayed on the potholed highway as Ethan clutched the army green backpack to his chest. Inside, besides a few clothes folded with the precision his 2 years in the service had taught him, was the silver locket he'd carried since he was a kid. It was a simple object, with no real monetary value, but it held the most precious memory he owned, a letter written in his own hand for his mother, Helen, before he left. A promise that he would come back. A declaration of love he'd never managed to say out loud, but had put on paper with the sincerity of someone who knew he might not get another chance. Now, finally, he was coming home. To Springfield Gardens, a working-class suburb of Cleveland, to the unpaved road where he'd grown up playing barefoot soccer and running through the sprinkler on hot summer afternoons. He was coming back to the arms of Helen, the woman who had raised him alone after his father left without a forwarding address, without an explanation, without even a goodbye note. Helen, who took in laundry, ironed late into the night, and still found time to make the warm oatmeal he loved. Helen, who had cried so much the day he decided to enlist, but who wiped her tears and said she supported her son's decision, because it was his chance at a better life, a career, a future. Ethan stared out the fogged-up bus window, his chest tight with anticipation. How many times, lying in his bunk at the barracks, had he dreamed of this moment? Of the surprise in her eyes when she saw him at the door, taller, stronger, more of a man. Of the tight hug, the smell of laundry detergent and home cooking that always filled the house. Of the stories she would tell, updating him on the neighbors' lives, the news from the neighborhood, the small joys and sorrows of everyday life. The driver announced the final stop, and Ethan got off, swinging the backpack onto his shoulders. The afternoon was slowly settling over Springfield Gardens, painting the sky a reddish-orange that mixed with the distant smoke from the industrial plants. He started walking down the familiar streets, feeling every stone under his feet, every corner sparking a memory. There was Mr. Peterson's bakery, where he used to buy warm bread on Sundays. Further on, the little park where he played ball with his friends. Everything looked the same but different, as if time had only passed for him. When he turned onto his street, Ethan felt something strange in the air. A heavy silence different from the usual neighborhood buzz. The houses were too quiet, the sidewalks too empty. He quickened his pace, his heart starting to pound. Up ahead, at number 47, was the light blue house where he'd spent his entire childhood. But it wasn't blue anymore. It was dirty, the paint peeling, the windows boarded up with old planks of wood. The small iron gate, which Helen always kept freshly painted and oiled, was crooked, torn from one of its hinges. On the fence, a faded sign announced, "For sale." Ethan stopped on the sidewalk, his legs feeling weak. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a mistake. Maybe it was the wrong house. But no, this was it. There was the apple tree he used to climb as a boy. There was the window to the room where he slept. There was the front door, now secured with a rusty padlock, where Helen always used to wait for him in her rocking chair, embroidering or peeling vegetables for dinner. He dropped his backpack and ran to the door, shaking the padlock, yelling, "Mom, Mom! I'm here, it's me, Ethan." His voice echoed down the empty street unanswered. Only a distant dog barked, breaking the agonizing silence. Ethan looked around, desperate. Where was everyone? Where were the neighbors? Where was his mother? Then he saw a movement in the house next door. The curtain twitched slightly, as if someone was peeking. Ethan ran to the gate and pounded on it. Mrs. Davis, it's me. Ethan, please, open up. I need to talk to you." There was a long silence before the door opened, just a crack. Mrs. Davis, the neighbor who had lived there for over 30 years, appeared in the gap. She was older, more stooped, her hair now completely white. Her eyes, which had always been cheerful and welcoming, were filled with a heavy, almost tangible sadness. "Ethan, honey?" "You're back," she said, her voice weak, hesitant. "I'm back, Mrs. Davis. I'm back. But the house is locked up. There's a for sale sign. Where's my mum? Do you know where she is?" The woman looked away, clutching the door as if she wanted to shut it again. Ethan felt panic rising in his chest. "Please, Mrs. Davis, I need to know. Is she okay? Did she move? Is she living with someone?" Mrs. Davis took a deep breath, her eyes filling with tears. "She's gone, Ethan. After everything that happened with your wife, she just disappeared." "What do you mean, disappeared? And what does Jessica have to do with this? I left them together, taking care of each other." "Taking care?" The neighbor's voice was a bitter whisper. "Ethan, you have no idea what happened here." "Then tell me. Tell me now." But Mrs. Davis just shook her head, like someone carrying a burden too heavy to share. "Go see the social worker at the non-profit near downtown. Sarah, she can help you more than I can." And before Ethan could insist, she closed the door, leaving him alone on the sidewalk with more questions than answers. Ethan stood there for a long moment, trying to process what he'd just heard. Disappeared. The word echoed in his mind like a funeral bell. What did she mean? Disappeared. People don't just vanish into thin air. Especially not Helen, who knew every inch of this neighborhood, who had deep roots in this community. And what did Jessica have to do with all of this? Jessica. His wife. The woman he'd met 3 years ago at a cousin's wedding. She was different from the girls in the neighborhood. She spoke well, dressed elegantly, had gone to a private school. Ethan had fallen head over heels. Even knowing they came from different worlds, even sensing his mother didn't fully approve of his choice, he had pushed forward. They married in a simple ceremony, and Jessica moved into the Blue House, promising to take care of Helen while he was away on duty. At first everything seemed fine. The letters Jessica sent spoke of a peaceful life together, of mutual care, of a harmonious routine. But Helen's letters grew shorter, more evasive. Ethan had chalked it up to her difficulty with writing, her lack of time, her shyness. He never imagined it could be something else. He picked up his backpack and started walking toward the center of town. He had to find this Sarah. He had to understand what the hell was going on. With every step, the anguish in his chest grew, mixed with a dull rage that was beginning to simmer in his veins. The non-profit's office was in an old building on the second floor with a small sign by the entrance, "Extended Hands, Social Services and Community Support." Ethan took the stairs 2 at a time and pushed open the glass door. A young woman with curly hair tied up in a bun looked up from her computer. "Good afternoon. Can I help you?" "I need to speak with Sarah. It's urgent." "That's me, Sarah Jenkins. What's wrong?" Ethan took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts. "My name is Ethan Miller. I've been in the Army for the last 2 years and I just got back. My mother, Helen Miller, lived in Springfield Gardens, but when I got home today the house was locked up, abandoned, and I was told she disappeared. They told me to find you." Sarah turned pale. She stood up slowly, walked around her desk, and closed the office door. "Sit down, Ethan. I need to tell you something." He sat in the plastic chair, his hands trembling slightly. Sarah pulled up another chair and sat across from him, her eyes full of compassion and sorrow. "I know your mother. Or rather, I met her. About 4 months ago we received reports from neighbors about an elderly woman living in a state of extreme vulnerability. When I went to investigate, I found a woman in..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I found a woman living near the city landfill, in the industrial zone. No ID, no money, apparently no family." Ethan felt the world spin. "No, that can't be her. My mother has a family. She has me. She has a house. I know. But when I tried to help her, she was very confused, very frightened. She talked about an evil daughter who had kicked her out. She wouldn't go to a shelter, wouldn't accept help. She said she was safe there, hiding. I tried several times, but she always ran away." "And you didn't try to find her family?" "I tried, Ethan, but she couldn't remember her address clearly. She didn't have any documents that could help. And it's a big area. Without a full name, without a clear reference, it was impossible. Ethan ran his hands over his face, feeling tears burn his eyes. A landfill. Helen, the woman who had always been so dignified, so meticulous about her clean house, her ironed and fragrant clothes, was living at a landfill. Is she still there? I don't know. I haven't been able to find her for 2 weeks. She might have moved. She might have accepted help from someone, or she might have... Sarah didn't finish the sentence, but Ethan understood what she meant. He shot to his feet. I have to go there now, please, take me there. Sarah grabbed her purse and car keys without hesitation. Let's go. The drive to the industrial zone was silent. Ethan stared out the window without seeing anything, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. How had he let this happen? How had he not noticed? Helen's letters getting shorter and shorter made sense now. The evasive answers, the superficial topics. She was trying to protect him. She didn't want him to worry, didn't want him to abandon his dream of a military career for her sake. And Jessica, what had she done? Mrs. Davis had said Helen disappeared after everything that happened with his wife. But what had happened? What role did Jessica play in all this? Sarah parked the car in a vacant lot, near a field where mountains of trash were piled under the scorching sun. The smell was nauseating, a mix of decomposing organic matter, burnt plastic and chemical waste. A few people were picking through the garbage, collecting recyclables. Barefoot children ran between torn bags. Skinny dogs fought over scraps of food. Ethan got out of the car and started walking through the mounds of trash, his eyes searching, his heart racing. Sarah followed, pointing out the areas where she used to see Helen. Near that blue dumpster, or over there, under that black tarp. They walked for nearly half an hour, calling out, searching, asking the people working there. Most just shook their heads or shrugged, until an old man, his face weathered by the sun and time, pointed to a more remote area. There's an old lady who stays over there near that green dumpster. She doesn't talk much, just stares into space. Ethan ran in the direction he pointed, his heart nearly leaping out of his chest. And then he saw her. Under a ripped tarp, sitting on the dirt ground, was a hunched, unrecognizable figure. Her hair, once neatly combed and tied in a bun, now hung dirty and tangled over her shoulders. Her skin, once tan and healthy, was pale and covered in... Sorry, sis. Her clothes were filthy rags that barely covered her thin, skeletal body. But what made Ethan drop to his knees was what she wore around her neck, a silver locket, the same kind of locket he had in his backpack, a matching set. She was wearing hers, but it was empty. No picture, no letter. "Mom," he whispered, crawling toward her. "Mom, it's me, Ethan." The woman slowly lifted her eyes, as if the movement cost her immense effort. Her eyes, once full of life and joy, were now dull, empty. She looked at him without recognition. Ethan felt a sharp pain tear through his chest. "It's me, Mom, your son. I'm back. I came back for you." Helen blinked slowly, her head tilting slightly, as if trying to process the words. Then something in her gaze shifted. A spark, small but clear, of recognition. "Ethan?" Her voice was hoarse, broken. "Yes, Mom. It's me. I'm here." And then she broke down. She began to cry, a loud, desperate sob that shook her frail body. Ethan pulled her into his arms, feeling her sharp bones through her clothes, smelling the filth, but none of it mattered. All that mattered was that he had found her, that she was alive. Sarah approached slowly, her own eyes filled with tears. "We need to get her to a hospital. Now." Ethan nodded, carefully lifting Helen into his arms as if she were made of glass. She was so light. Too light. As he carried her to the car, Helen began to speak in a confused, broken murmur. "She took everything, locked the door, said I was crazy. No one believed me. No one." "Who, Mom? Who did this?" "The evil one. The one with the pretty smile and a heart of stone." "She tore up your words, son. Tore them up and laughed at me." Ethan felt rage explode in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. Not now. Right now, Helen needed care. She needed food, a bath, medicine, love. Later, he would go looking for answers. Later, he would go looking for justice. Sarah drove at top speed to the nearest ER. Ethan rushed in carrying Helen, shouting for help. A medical team ran to meet them, placing her on a gurney, asking rapid-fire questions as they wheeled her inside. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, possible infections, likely signs of psychological trauma. We're going to have to admit her. Ethan followed as far as he could, holding her hand, whispering that everything was okay, that he was there, that he would never leave her alone again. Helen looked at him as if she were afraid that if she closed her eyes, he would disappear again. When they finally stopped him from going past the emergency room doors, Ethan leaned against the wall and slid to the floor, covering his face with his hands. Sarah sat beside him in respectful silence. After a long time, Ethan lifted his head. His voice was cold, controlled, but there was a dangerous fire in his eyes. "I need to know everything that happened." He paused, clenching his fists. "And then I'm going to find the person who did this to her, and I'm going to get justice." Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll do it the right way, Ethan, through the legal system. But first, your mother needs to recover. She needs you to be strong and whole by her side." He nodded, but inside, he was already making plans. He was already replaying every memory, every letter, every phone call he'd had with Jessica over the past 2 years, looking for signs he should have seen, looking for clues he should have noticed. And as he waited for news from the medical team, Ethan opened his backpack and took out his locket. Inside, intact, was the letter he had written to Helen, the same words that, according to her, had been torn up and destroyed. He opened it and read, each word feeling like a stab. "Mom, when you read this, I'll already be far away. But I want you to know that everything I am, everything I've achieved, everything I will achieve is because of you. You taught me how to be a man. You taught me to have dignity. You taught me that love isn't just said with words, but with presence, with care, with sacrifice. I will come back, and when I do, I'm going to make you proud. I'm going to give you the life you deserve. I love you more than anything in this world. Your son, Ethan." He slowly closed the locket, pressing it against his chest. And it was then that he understood what Helen meant. Jessica had read the letter. She had used his own words against his mother. She had turned a declaration of love into a weapon of torture. The emergency room door opened and a doctor came out, pulling off her gloves. "Are you Helen's son?" "I am. How is she?" "She's stable. She'll need to be hospitalized for a few days, but she's going to recover. Physically, at least. The psychological side will require specialized care. I'll take care of everything. Don't worry." The doctor paused. "Can I ask a question? How did she get into this state? Who was taking care of her before?" Ethan took a deep breath. "That's exactly what I'm going to find out." And when he found out, when he had all the answers, when he knew every detail of what Jessica had done to Helen, then, yes, Ethan would take the necessary steps, not with violence, not with blind revenge, but with the force of the truth, with the weight of justice, with the determination of someone who learned in the army that some battles aren't won with weapons, but with strategy, patience, and conviction. The battle was just beginning, and this time Ethan wouldn't leave until he saw his mother safe, protected, and with her dignity restored. No matter how long it took, no matter what he had to do, Helen would not be forgotten again. She would not be silenced again. She would not be erased again, because where silence lives, secrets live. And secrets, when exposed to the light, lose all their power. The next 3 days passed in a thick fog of conflicting emotions. Ethan practically lived at the hospital, only leaving Helen's room for a quick shower at a room Sarah had arranged for him, at a support house run by the non-profit. He watched every test, every procedure, every doctor's visit. He held her hand when the nurses had to change the dressings on the infected sores that marked her skin. He gently wiped her face when she was still too weak to do it herself. And most importantly, he was just there, present, as he should have been from the start. Helen slept a lot for the first 48 hours. Her body was recovering from severe malnutrition, chronic dehydration, and the infections that had been spreading silently. But between naps, she would open her eyes and search for Ethan as if she needed to confirm he was real, that he wasn't just another delusion from her tired mind. On the third day, she finally managed to sit up in bed and eat a whole bowl of soup without help. Ethan was beside her, watching every spoonful with a mix of relief and sadness. Relief because she was getting better. Sadness because he saw in every slow, cautious movement the deep trauma her recent experiences had left behind. "Son," Helen said suddenly, her voice still weak but firmer than before. "You shouldn't have come back." Ethan's chest tightened. "What do you mean, Mom?" "I dreamed about this day every single day I was at the base." She looked down at the empty bowl. "I didn't want you to see me like this. I tried to hold on until you got back. I tried not to be a burden." "You were never a burden, Mom. Never." Helen shook her head slowly, tears starting to stream down her face. "I was. She told me that every day. Every single day. That I was a nuisance. That you were married and had a new life now, a beautiful wife. And that I should accept my place. My place was to disappear." "Who said that?" Ethan already knew the answer, but he needed to hear it. "Jessica." Helen's voice trembled as she said the name. "Your wife." Ethan clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay calm. "Tell me, Mum. Everything. From the beginning." Helen took a deep breath as if preparing to relive every painful moment. In the beginning, she was polite, cold, but polite. She'd share the housework, cook, clean. But as soon as you were really gone, everything changed. Slowly. So slowly that at first I didn't even notice. "What do you mean?" "First, it was little things. She started saying I washed the clothes wrong, ironed wrong, cooked wrong. She said she was taking over the kitchen because my food wasn't good enough. Then she started saying I used too much water in the shower, that I wasted electricity leaving the TV on. She was cutting me off, you see, cutting off my space, my freedom, my voice." "And the neighbors? Didn't anyone notice?" Helen let out a bitter laugh. "She was smart, son. Very smart. In front of the neighbors, she was all smiles and kindness. She'd bring bread for Mrs. Davis, help Mrs. Robinson with her groceries. Everyone adored her. They said you were lucky to marry such a capable, polite young woman. And when I tried to tell them what she did when no one was looking, when I tried to ask for help, she had already planted the seed." "What seed?" "That I was getting senile, forgetful, confused." Helen wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "She started hiding my things, and then asking where I'd put them, in front of people. She'd hide my blood pressure medicine and then tell the neighbors I'd forgotten to take. Ate again. One time she locked the front door from the inside and then ran out into the street yelling that I'd wandered off and gotten lost. When I got back from the store, she was crying in Mrs. Davis's arms, saying she was so worried that I could get hurt. Everyone believed her." Ethan felt rage boiling in his veins. "And the letters? The letters she sent me saying everything was fine. She made me write them. She'd sit next to me and dictate what I had to say. That everything was fine, that we were friends, that that was taking good care of me. And I wrote them, son. Because I was scared of what she'd do if I disobeyed." "Scared of what, Mum?" "Scared of not eating. She controlled everything. She locked the pantry, locked the refrigerator. She said I was too fat, that I needed to lose weight. She'd give me one small portion of food a day, and that was it. If I complained, she'd skip a meal as punishment." Ethan ran his hands over his face, trying to hold back tears of anger and frustration. "Keep going, I need to know everything." Helen took a deep breath as if gathering the courage to continue. "Then she started locking my bedroom door at night. She said it was so I wouldn't wander around the house and have an accident, because I was getting confused. But I knew the truth. She did it to humiliate me, to show me I had no control over anything anymore, not even my own room. And the medicine? She switched them. She'd give me sleeping pills instead of my blood pressure medicine, vitamins instead of my heart medication. I'd start feeling sick, and she'd take me to the clinic, telling the doctors I wasn't taking my pills correctly. The doctors believed her, After all, she was young, pretty, well-spoken. I was just a confused old woman. Ethan got up and started pacing the room, trying to process everything he was hearing. How had he been so blind? How had he not noticed anything? And the locket, Mom? What happened to the letter inside? Helen touched the empty locket at her neck. She found it. One night, when I was already very weak, very scared, she broke down my bedroom door. She said she knew I was hiding something precious, and she was going to find it. She tore the room apart. When she found the locket, she opened it and read the letter. Read it out loud, imitating your voice, mocking every word. She said you never really loved me, that it was just an obligation, a son's duty. Then she tore the letter up in front of me and threw the pieces in the trash. Why? Why would she do that? Because she wanted to destroy me completely, son. She wanted me to lose every last bit of hope. And it worked. After that, I gave up. I stopped fighting. And how did you end up? Ethan couldn't finish the sentence. At the landfill? Helen let out a shaky sigh. One day she just threw me out. Said she couldn't stand taking care of a crazy, ungrateful woman anymore. She took my things, what little I had left, and threw them on the street. She locked the gate. The neighbors were at their windows watching. But nobody did anything. After all, she'd spent months telling them I was problematic, difficult. They believed she had tried everything and that I was the impossible one. And where did you go? I was on the street. I slept in the park, under awnings, on benches at the bus station. Until one night some young men tried to hurt me. I managed to get away and ended up in the landfill area. I found an empty dumpster there. I hid inside, and that's where I stayed. Why didn't you get help? Why didn't you go to a police station, a clinic? Helen looked at him with an expression of deep pain. Because she took my documents, son. I had nothing, not a single piece of paper to prove who I was. And every time someone tried to help me, I panicked. I thought it was a trap, that she had sent someone to get me, to hurt me more. I didn't trust anyone. I didn't trust anything. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed and pulled Helen into a tight hug. I'm so sorry, Mum. I'm so sorry I wasn't here. I'm so sorry I believed her. I'm so sorry for everything. Helen cried on his shoulder, sobbing. You didn't know, son. How could you have known? She was so careful, so meticulous. She never left visible marks. She never yelled where others could hear. It was all calculated. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other, sharing the pain and the relief of being together again. When they finally separated, Ethan wiped his own tears and looked into his mother's eyes. I'm going to make her pay for what she did, the right way through the law, but I need your help. How? I need you to tell this whole story again, but this time on tape. I need a formal statement, and I need you to help me remember everything, every detail, dates, times, witnesses who might have seen something, even if they didn't know what was happening. Helen nodded, wiping her tears. I'll tell it. I'll tell everything. But son, what if no one believes me? What if they think I really am crazy? They'll believe you, Mum, because I'm going to gather proof. I'm going to find every piece of the truth she tried to bury. In the following days, while Helen continued to recover in the hospital, Ethan began his investigation. Sarah was crucial in this process. She already knew social workers in other areas, psychologists specializing in trauma, and lawyers who worked on domestic abuse cases. Together they formed a strategy. The first step was to record Helen's statement. With the help of Sarah and a lawyer named Mr. Wallace, who took the case pro bono after hearing the story, they sat with Helen in a private room at the hospital and recorded every word. She spoke for nearly 2 hours, recalling every humiliation, every deprivation, every moment of fear. The lawyer asked specific questions, helping to build a clear timeline of events. Ethan watched it all in silence, taking notes of names, dates, and situations that could be investigated. With each revelation, his anger grew, but he kept it controlled, channeled. He knew emotional outbursts wouldn't help. He needed to be strategic. The second step was to talk to the neighbors. Ethan returned to Springfield Gardens, this time with Sarah and Mr. Wallace. They went door to door explaining the situation, asking people to remember anything out of the ordinary. Mrs. Davis was the first to open up. "I knew something was wrong," she confessed, her hands trembling as she held a coffee mug. "I saw Helen getting thinner, quieter, but Jessica was so attentive to me she'd bring me bread, ask about my health. I thought Helen was being ungrateful, difficult. I never imagined," she trailed off, guilt weighing on her shoulders. More neighbors came forward with small accounts. Mrs. Robinson remembered seeing Jessica lock Helen's bedroom door one night. Mr. Hayes said he once heard muffled screams coming from the Blue House, but Jessica had told him Helen was having a confused episode and she was taking care of it. Young Patricia, who lived 3 houses down, remembered seeing Jessica throwing things out in black trash bags late at night and thinking it was strange. None of the accounts were definitive proof, but together they began to form a pattern of control, isolation, and abuse. The third step was the hardest, confronting Jessica. But before that, Ethan needed more. He needed something concrete, something irrefutable. That's when he decided to go back to the Blue House. It was a Saturday afternoon when he approached the crooked gate, his heart pounding. The house was still closed up, the for sale sign still hanging on the fence. But this time, Ethan wasn't there to bang on the door and yell. He was there to investigate, with Sarah acting as a lookout. He jumped the fence and entered the yard. Everything was overgrown and littered with trash. The windows were boarded up. He forced the back door, which gave way after a few shoves. Inside, the house smelled of mildew and neglect, but it also smelled of memories. Ethan walked through the rooms, recognizing each piece of furniture, each stain on the wall. The living room where he used to watch TV with Helen, the kitchen where she made his oatmeal, his room, now empty and cold. And then Helen's room. The door was broken, the lock shattered. Ethan's stomach churned. He entered slowly, looking around. The bed was overturned, the wardrobe empty. On the floor were shards of glass from a broken picture frame. He started searching. He went through empty drawers, looked under the bed, checked the corners. Nothing. Jessica had cleaned everything out very well, or almost everything. As he checked the wardrobe a second time, Ethan noticed something odd about the back panel. One of the boards looked newer, lighter. He tapped it lightly and heard a hollow sound. Carefully, he began to pry the board loose. It came off easily, revealing a small hidden space. Inside, covered in dust, was a blue hardcover notebook. Ethan took the notebook with trembling hands and moved into the light from the window. He opened it slowly. On the first page, he immediately recognized Helen's shaky handwriting. It was a diary. He began to read, and the world seemed to stop. Helen had documented everything. Every day of abuse, every humiliation, every moment of despair. The entries started right after Ethan left for the army and continued for months. March 15th. Ethan left today. Jessica was smiling at the farewell, but as soon as he was out of sight, the smile vanished. She looked at me and said things were going to change now. I didn't understand at the time. March 22nd. She locked the pantry today, said I ate too much, that I was getting fat. I laughed. I thought she was joking, but she didn't laugh back. April 5th. I was hungry today. She only gave me stale bread and water, said it was punishment for complaining about the food yesterday. Ethan turned the pages, feeling tears burn his eyes. The entries became more and more desperate, more confused, reflecting Helen's deteriorating mental state. June 10th. She read Ethan's letter today, tore it up in front of me, said he would never come back for me, said I was a dead weight. And then, on the last few pages, something that made Ethan hold his breath. Helen had copied his letter by hand, word for word, in her trembling script, with tear stains blurring the ink, but it was all there. Beneath the copy she had written, "If I disappear, if something happens to me, I want my son to know that I never doubted his love, and that I forgive him for not seeing, because she was too good at lying, and I was too weak to fight. But his love was my strength until the end. Helen Miller, August." Ethan closed the notebook and clutched it to his chest, sobbing. He had found it. He had found the irrefutable proof. He had found Helen's voice, preserved in her own words, documenting every crime Jessica had committed. He left the house with the notebook hidden under his shirt and jumped back over the fence. Sarah was waiting anxiously. "Find anything?" "I found everything." Back at the hospital, Ethan showed the diary to Helen. She looked at the notebook as if she were seeing a ghost. "I'd forgotten I wrote that. I thought she had found it and destroyed it too." "She didn't find it, Mom, and this is going to make all the difference." Mr. Wallace, when he saw the diary, was visibly moved. "This is gold, Ethan. This is contemporaneous documentary evidence. With this and her testimony, we have a strong case." But Ethan knew that before going to court, before lawsuits and hearings, there was something he had to do, something he had to confront. He needed to look Jessica in the eye and let her know the game was over, that he knew everything, that she wasn't going to get away with it anymore. And so, on a clear Thursday morning, Ethan took the address he'd gotten from an acquaintance. Jessica was no longer in the Blue House. She had moved into a small apartment in a more central neighborhood, probably with the money that should have been used to care for Helen. Ethan knocked on the door and waited. He heard light footsteps approaching. The door opened, and there she was. Jessica, his wife, the woman he had loved, the woman who had destroyed his mother. She turned pale when she saw him. "Ethan, you're back?" He didn't smile. He didn't greet her. He just looked deep into her eyes, letting her see all the coldness, all the disappointment, all the contained rage. "We need to talk. Now." Jessica took a step back, her hand still on the doorknob. Ethan noticed the defensive gesture and felt a bitter satisfaction. She was afraid. Finally, after everything she had done, she was getting a taste of the fear she had inflicted on Helen for so long. "Aren't you going to invite me in?" Ethan's voice was calm, controlled, but there was a thread of steel beneath the words. Jessica hesitated, her eyes scanning his face as if trying to gauge his intentions. After a tense moment, she opened the door a little wider and stepped aside. Ethan entered the small apartment, observing everything with clinical attention. It was a simple place but neat. New furniture, a flat-screen TV, modern decor. Nothing that resembled the humble house where Helen had lived. Nothing that resembled the life he had left behind. "You look different," Jessica said, closing the door. "More serious." 2 years in the army. "I change as a person, but not as much as finding out your wife is a completely different person than you thought." Her face paled, but she maintained her composure. She even tried to manage a smile. "What are you talking about, Ethan? I know you must be upset that I moved out of the house, but where is my mother, Jessica?" The smile died on her lips. She looked away. "I don't know. She left, disappeared." "Liar." Ethan took a step forward. "I know exactly where she is. I know what you did to her." Jessica let out a nervous laugh. "Ethan, your mother got sick, mentally, you know. I tried to take care of her, I swear I did. But she got more and more confused, more aggressive. The neighbors can confirm it. She accused me of absurd things, said I was stealing her food, that I was locking her in her room. They were delusions. I did what I could, but it got to a point where I just couldn't handle it anymore." Ethan crossed his arms, his gaze fixed on her. "So you threw her out on the street?" "I didn't throw her out. She left. She ran away in the middle of the night, and I couldn't find her. I filed a police report, I checked shelters, I asked everyone, but she just vanished." More lies. Ethan pulled a small digital recorder from his pocket. "Want to hear the truth? The truth from the person who actually lived through these last 2 years?" Jessica went rigid, her wide eyes fixed on the device. "What is that?" "It's my mother's voice. Recovered, fed, medicated, and finally able to tell me everything you did." He pressed play. Helen's voice filled the apartment, still weak but clear, narrating the humiliations, the hunger, the switched medications, the isolation. Ethan watched Jessica's face change color as the recording played. First pale, then a flush of anger or shame. It was hard to tell. When the recording ended, the silence in the room was as heavy as lead. Jessica had her arms crossed defensively over her chest, her chin lifted in a defiant gesture that didn't match the tremor in her hands. That doesn't prove anything. It's the word of a woman who is clearly mentally ill against mine. Who do you think they're going to believe? Ethan took another step closer, and Jessica instinctively backed away. Maybe you're right, maybe her word alone isn't enough. But what about when we add the statements from the neighbors who saw and heard strange things? And what about when we add the fact that you took over the house, sold her things and left her without an ID or any money? Jessica swallowed hard. I didn't sell anything. The house is still there. Empty, stripped of everything that was hers, renovated with money that should have been used to care for her. I used my own money. You don't work, Jessica, you never have. Where did that money come from? She opened her mouth to answer, but nothing came out. Ethan saw panic begin to set in her eyes. He continued, relentless. And there's one more thing. He pulled a photograph of a page from the diary out of his pocket. Her diary, where she wrote down everything. Every day of torment you inflicted, every humiliation, every deprivation, with dates, times, and details. Jessica's face crumbled. That's a forgery. She wouldn't write something like that. Then how do I know about the letter? Ethan felt his voice tremble with contained emotion. The letter I left in her locket. The letter you read used to humiliate her and then tore up. How would I know about that if she hadn't told me? Jessica took another step back, until her back was against the wall. Her eyes were shining now, not with tears of remorse, but with pure fury. You don't understand anything, she hissed, the victim mask finally falling away. You have no idea what it was like to live in that ridiculous house, in that miserable neighborhood, taking care of an annoying old woman who never liked me. Ethan stood motionless, letting her talk, letting her dig her own grave. I deserved more, Jessica continued, her voice rising. I married you thinking you were going to make something of yourself, that you'd give me a better life. But what did you do? You enlisted and abandoned me with her. With that woman who looked at me like I was trash, who whispered things to the neighbors, who tried to turn you against me. My mother never did that. Yes, she did. She always did. From the day I met her. Jessica was screaming now, completely out of control. So when you left, I decided that if I had to be stuck in that hell, at least I was going to have some control, some power. She was going to learn her place. Ethan felt sick. And what was her place, Jessica? Invisible. Quiet, grateful to have a roof over her head, even if it was at the expense of my generosity. She was in her own house. It was my house, mine, you hear me? Because you married me, and that house became mine too. And I wasn't going to be held hostage by an old woman who did nothing but judge me. Ethan took a deep breath, forcing himself not to explode. You stole her food. You switched her medicine. You locked her in her room. You spread lies that she was crazy, and when none of that was enough to destroy her, you just threw her out like trash. I gave her what she deserved. Jessica's face was red, the veins in her neck bulging. Saint Helen, poor little Helen. Everyone was always on her side, but nobody saw the truth. She was manipulative, poisonous. The only poisonous person here is you. Jessica let out a hysterical laugh. What are you going to do, Ethan? Hit me, hurt me, prove you're just like the father who abandoned you? The mention of his father was like a slap. Ethan felt the rage explode in his chest, but he kept his fists at his sides. He forced himself to breathe, to maintain control. He wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of losing it. I'm not going to lay a finger on you, he said, his voice low and deadly. I don't have to, because unlike you, I'm going to use the justice system. I'm going to use the law. And I'm going to use every word you just said. Only then did Jessica realize. Her gaze fell to the recorder, still in Ethan's hand, still on. The blood drained from her face. You can't use that. I didn't consent. You confessed to everything, voluntarily, in your own home. Ethan put the recorder back in his pocket. And you know what's funny? You were right about one thing. People really did like you. They thought you were polite, kind, helpful. But you know what I discovered? People like that are usually very good at hiding who they really are, until the mask falls off. Jessica slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, her face in her hands. "It's over," she mumbled. "It's all over." "No," Ethan corrected, walking toward the door. "It's over for you. For my mother, it's just beginning. She's going to get back everything you took from her. Her dignity, her peace, her voice, and you are going to pay for every second of suffering you caused." He opened the door and paused, looking back one last time. "Oh, and about the letter. She made a copy, in her own handwriting, and she hid it where you would never find it. So all those words you tried to destroy, they still exist, and they're going to be read out loud in a courtroom for everyone to hear how much my mother loved me and how much you tried to erase that love." He left without looking back, closing the door on the sound of Jessica's crying. But it wasn't the cry of remorse. It was the cry of someone who had been caught, of someone who had lost. Outside the building, Ethan leaned against the wall and let his body shake. He had done. He had confronted her. He had gotten the confession. He had kept control when all he wanted to do was scream. He took his phone out of his pocket and called Mr. Wallace. "I got it. She confessed to everything. It's on tape." On the other end of the line, the lawyer let out a sigh of relief. "Good work, Ethan. Now come to the office. We're filing everything today." The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal procedures. Mr. Wallace filed a civil suit for emotional and material damages, as well as criminal charges for elder abuse, misappropriation of property and abandonment. With the diary, the recording of Helen's testimony, Jessica's confession, and the neighbors' statements, the case was solid. Helen was discharged from the hospital, but had nowhere to go. The Blue House was tied up in legal disputes. That's when the Extended Hands non-profit stepped in, offering a temporary home in an assisted living project they ran for vulnerable seniors. Ethan went with her on moving day. It was a simple but clean and welcoming two-story house where 6 seniors lived under the supervision of caregivers. Helen got a small but private room with a comfortable bed, a wardrobe, and a window that looked out onto a flower garden. "It's just temporary, Mom. As soon as we sort everything out in court, you'll have a better place." Helen held his hand, her eyes shining. "This is already a palace, son. It has a clean bed, hot food, and people who treat you with respect. It's more than I dreamed of having these last few months." Ethan hugged his mother, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. Relief because she was safe. Sadness because this, a simple room in an assisted living home, felt like a luxury after everything she had been through. Meanwhile, the case began to gain traction, not through sensationalism, but through the quiet mobilization happening behind the scenes. Sarah, through the non-profit, shared the story in groups for social workers and elder rights advocates. Not with names, not with photos, but with the essence of the situation. How many Helens are out there? How many seniors suffer abuse in their own homes, silenced by shame, fear, or the disbelief of others? A psychologist specializing in trauma offered free counseling for Helen. In their sessions, she slowly began to rebuild her trust, to remember who she was before it all happened. Ethan participated whenever he could, learning about the signs of emotional abuse he hadn't known how to identify, about how manipulation works in cycles, about how victims are systematically isolated and discredited. A month after the confrontation, the summons arrived for Jessica to appear at a preliminary hearing. Ethan was there, sitting next to Helen and Mr. Wallace. When Jessica entered the room, she looked like a diminished version of herself, without the careful makeup, without the elegant clothes, accompanied by a lawyer who didn't seem to have much to work with. The hearing was technical, bureaucratic, but there was a moment when the judge, a middle-aged woman with a firm gaze, looked directly at Jessica. "Do you have anything to say regarding these accusations?" Jessica looked up, briefly meeting Helen's gaze from across the room. For a second, Ethan thought he would see remorse, but all he saw was resentment, bitterness. "I took care of her the best I could," Jessica said, her voice monotone. "If she interpreted my care as abuse, I'm sorry. But I never intended to hurt her." Mr. Wallace stood up. "Your Honor, we have a recording in which the defendant voluntarily confesses to depriving the victim of food, switching her medications, and using intentional psychological manipulation. There is no doubt about her intent." The judge nodded. The recording will be submitted as evidence and reviewed. I also order that psychological evaluations be conducted on both parties and that social workers visit the witnesses to corroborate their statements. Hearing adjourned. When they left the courthouse, Helen was trembling. Ethan wrapped his arm around her. "It's okay, Mom, this was just the beginning." "But that woman in there," she said, pointing at the courthouse, "that's not the Jessica I knew. That's an empty person, because the mask fell off, and without it there was nothing left." 2 more weeks passed. Ethan got a temporary job at a gas station, working the night shift so he could follow the case during the day. He visited Helen every day, sometimes bringing cheap flowers from the market, sometimes just sitting with her in the garden, talking about simple things, about the good past, about plans for the future, about the slow but steady healing. It was during one of these visits that Helen handed him something, a worn brown envelope. "What's this, Mom?" "Open it." Ethan opened it and found a sheet of paper inside, yellowed with age. He immediately recognized his own younger, more uncertain handwriting. It was the letter. The copy of the original letter he had written before leaving for the army. The copy Helen had made by hand and hidden in her diary. "I asked Sarah to print and laminate it," Helen explained. "Now it will last forever." And he noticed she was holding her locket. She opened it, and inside, perfectly fitted, was the laminated letter. Ethan felt his eyes burn. "Thank you, Mom." "No, son. Thank you for not giving up on me." They sat there on the garden bench under the shade of a fruit-laden apple tree, holding hands like they used to when Ethan was a child and had nightmares. Except now, the nightmare was real, and they were waking up from it together. The following week there was unexpected news. One of the neighbors, Mrs. Robinson, showed up at Mr. Wallace's office with a plastic bag. Inside were DVDs. "They're from my home security cameras," she explained, embarrassed. "I'd forgotten I had them installed a few years ago, but then I remembered and went to check. Some of the recordings were still there." "What's on them?" "Shots of the street, and you can see Helen's house. There's one scene," she hesitated. "There's a scene of Jessica throwing out trash bags in the middle of the night, and you can see clothes inside, Helen's clothes." Mr. Wallace took the DVDs as if they were gold. "This is crucial evidence. Thank you so much for bringing this." Mrs. Robinson wiped away a tear. "I should have paid more attention. I should have been suspicious, but Jessica was so convincing." "She was trained to be," Ethan said without bitterness. "People like that study others. They know exactly what to say, how to act. It's not your fault." When the footage was analyzed, it showed exactly what Mrs. Robinson had described. Jessica, on 3 separate occasions, leaving in the middle of the night with large bags, putting them in the trash. In one of the shots, you could clearly see a floral blouse that Ethan recognized as his mother's. More evidence piled up. An employee at the neighborhood pharmacy remembered Jessica buying sleeping pills, even though Helen had never had insomnia. The doctor at the clinic confirmed that Helen had been coming to appointments in increasingly poor health, but that Jessica always had a plausible explanation for every symptom. The net was closing, and Jessica, even with her lawyer trying to discredit every piece of evidence, was running out of options. It was then that Ethan decided to do one last thing before the final hearing. He went back to the Blue House, now with legal permission to enter, and went through each room with a professional photographer Sarah knew. They documented everything. Helen's room with the broken door, the marks on the wall where furniture had been ripped out, the signs of neglect and abandonment. And there, in what had been his room, Ethan found one last surprise. In a forgotten drawer of a nightstand was a photo album. Pictures of his childhood with Helen, birthdays, Christmases, school graduations, and among them, torn photos. Photos of Jessica and Ethan together, which she herself had ripped up in a fit of rage. He carefully put the album away. More proof of her instability, her calculated cruelty. Another piece of the puzzle that showed who Jessica really was. When he left the house for the last time, Ethan looked back. That blue house, once a symbol of home, love, and security, was now just an empty building. But he knew that soon, when everything was resolved, he and Helen would build a new home. Somewhere else, with new memories, but always with the same love. Because love doesn't live in walls, it lives in actions, in presence, in choices. And Ethan had chosen to fight, he had chosen to stay, he had chosen not to let the silence win. And that choice would make all the difference. The date for the final hearing was set for a rainy Tuesday in November. Ethan woke up early, his stomach churning with anxiety. He had slept little, mentally reviewing all the points Mr. Wallace had gone over. He put on the best clothes he had, a borrowed pair of slacks and a white shirt that Sarah had meticulously ironed. He wanted to look presentable. He wanted the judge to see a dedicated son, a man of character, someone fighting for what was right. He stopped by the assisted living home to pick up Helen. She was ready, wearing a simple but clean dress that the other residents had helped her choose. She had gained weight in recent weeks. Her face was no longer so gaunt, and her eyes were slowly regaining the sparkle Ethan remembered from his childhood. But there was still a fragility there, a fragility that might never completely heal. "Are you ready, Mom?" Ethan asked, holding her hands. Helen took a deep breath. "I'm scared, son. Scared they won't believe me. Scared she'll manage to fool everyone again. That's not going to happen. We have too much proof. We have your voice, the diary, the recordings, the witnesses. The truth is on our side." She nodded, but Ethan could see her hands were trembling slightly. He offered his arm and she leaned on him, letting him guide her to Sarah's car, which was waiting at the door. The courthouse was crowded that morning. Family cases, inheritance disputes, contentious divorces. The daily life of a city unfolded there in closed rooms and formal hearings. Ethan, Helen, and Sarah sat on the benches in the hallway, waiting to be called. Mr. Wallace appeared a few minutes later, carrying a thick folder of documents. "Everything set?" Ethan asked. "All set. We have a solid case. But remember, only answer what you're asked. Be clear, objective, and honest. The truth is our greatest ally." When they were called, they entered a small but formal room. Judge Thompson, the same one from the preliminary hearing, was seated behind a high desk. On one side, Mr. Wallace, Ethan, and Helen. On the other, Jessica and her lawyer, a tired-looking, middle-aged man. Ethan looked at Jessica. She avoided his gaze, her eyes fixed on the table in front of her. She seemed smaller somehow. Not physically, but as if something inside her had shrunk. The arrogance she always carried had given way to a heavy resignation. The judge opened the file and began to read the main points of the case: abuse of a vulnerable elder, misappropriation of property, abandonment of an incapacitated person. The words sounded raw, definitive, in that formal setting. "We will hear from the victim first," the judge said, looking at Helen. "Ma'am, could you please approach?" Helen stood up on shaky legs. Ethan squeezed her hand for a second, giving her strength. She walked to the front and was directed to a chair next to the judge's desk. "Mrs. Miller," the judge began, her voice firm but not harsh, "are you aware that everything you say here will be recorded and can be used in these proceedings?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Then, in your own words, please tell me what happened, from the beginning." And Helen told her story. Her voice faltered at times. She paused to wipe away tears, but she told it. Every detail of the gradual deterioration of their life together, the deprivations, the humiliations, the calculated isolation, the systematic destruction of her dignity. She spoke of the hunger she felt at night, locked in her room, of the pills that made her drowsy when they were supposed to control her blood pressure, of the neighbors who stopped believing her because Jessica had so skillfully planted the seed of doubt. When she finished, the silence in the room was heavy. Even Jessica's lawyer seemed uncomfortable, shuffling papers without looking at his own client. The judge asked a few clarifying questions about specific dates, about whether she had sought help, about why she hadn't reported it sooner. Helen answered everything with the raw honesty of someone who had nothing left to hide, nothing to lose except the chance to finally be heard. When it was Jessica's turn to testify, Ethan watched her every move. He saw her swear to tell the truth. He saw her lawyer instruct her to remain calm. He saw her begin to build her defense. "I tried to take care of her," Jessica said, her voice carefully modulated. "But she had mental health issues that I wasn't prepared to handle. She would get aggressive, confused. I was working, taking care of the house, and still trying to give her attention. It became unsustainable. "Where did you work?" the judge asked, flipping through the documents. Jessica hesitated. I did odd jobs, crafts, some sales. Is there proof of income from these jobs? No, it was all informal. And yet you managed to renovate a house, buy new furniture, and rent an apartment? Jessica opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her lawyer asked for a moment to consult with his client. They whispered quickly. "My client used personal savings from before the marriage," the lawyer declared. Mr. Wallace stood up. "Your Honor, we have the defendant's bank statements, legally obtained through an authorized subpoena. They clearly show deposits of amounts consistent with the sale of assets from the house where she resided with the victim. Furthermore, we have security camera footage showing the defendant disposing of the victim's belongings at suspicious hours." The judge asked to see the evidence. Ethan watched Jessica turn pale as the videos were played. The image of her leaving with large, clearly heavy bags. The timestamp showed 3 in the morning. There was no way to justify it. "There's more," Mr. Wallace continued. "We have a recording of a conversation between my client and the defendant, where she voluntarily confesses to subjecting the victim to intentional deprivation and psychological manipulation." "That was obtained without my consent," Jessica burst out, losing her composure. "It's illegal." "The recording was made in the defendant's own private residence, without breaking and entering, and it captured a spontaneous confession. It is perfectly legal," Mr. Wallace countered. The judge gestured for them to calm down. "Let's hear the recording." And there in that formal courtroom Jessica's voice echoed, admitting she had controlled Helen, that she had deliberately isolated her, that she felt entitled to do so because she considered her mother-in-law a burden, a nuisance. Every word was a condemnation. When the recording ended, Jessica's face was in her hands. Her lawyer looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "Anything to add?" the judge asked, her tone making it clear she had already formed an opinion. Jessica lifted her face. There were tears, but Ethan couldn't tell if they were genuine or calculated. "I was stressed. I didn't know how to handle the situation, but I never wanted it to get to this point." "To this point," the judge repeated slowly, "where you left an elderly woman without documents, without resources, and without a home, knowing full well she was in no condition to care for herself?" Jessica did not answer. The judge leaned, back in her chair, observing everyone present. "I will now recess to review the file and deliberate. The sentence will be announced in 15 days. When they left the room, Helen collapsed into Ethan's arms, crying. Not from sadness, but from relief. She had told her story. She had been heard. She had looked into the eyes of the woman who had destroyed her and had not backed down. "You were amazing, Mum. So strong, so brave." Sarah came over, offering tissues. "Now we wait." But from what I saw in there, the judge understood everything perfectly. The 15 days that followed were a period of constant anxiety. Ethan kept working, visiting Helen, trying to maintain a routine. But his mind always went back to the case, to the possibilities. What if it wasn't enough? What if Jessica got a lenient sentence? What if the justice system failed? Helen, on the other hand, seemed lighter, as if the simple act of being heard, of having her pain validated, was already a victory. She now participated in the activities at the assisted living home. She helped in the garden, chatted with the other residents, and even started crocheting again, an activity she had given up years ago. On the 15th night, the eve of the sentencing, Ethan was in her room when Helen said something that surprised him. "Son, no matter what happens tomorrow, I've already won." "What do you mean, Mom?" "I won you back. I won my dignity back. I won a place where I'm treated with respect. I won a chance to start over." She held his hand. "If the court convicts her, great. But if it doesn't, I'll still be okay. Because I've learned that revenge doesn't heal. What heals is living well in spite of everything." Ethan felt his eyes burn. "You're incredible, you know that?" "No, son, I'm just a survivor, like so many others." The next day they returned to the courthouse. Mr. Wallace was already there, as were Jessica and her lawyer. When the judge entered, everyone rose. Ethan felt his heart race. The judge opened a document and began to read. First the facts, then the analysis of the evidence, then the legal considerations. Every word seemed to last an eternity. In light of the evidence presented, the recorded confessions, the witness testimonies, and the psychological evaluation attesting to the trauma suffered by the victim, there is no doubt as to the materiality and authorship of the crimes. The judge paused, looking directly at Jessica. The systematic abuse of a vulnerable elderly person, aggravated by the family relationship, the victim's dependence, and the cruelty of the methods employed, constitutes conduct of extreme gravity. Ethan squeezed Helen's hand. Therefore, I find the defendant, Jessica Miller, guilty of aggravated elder abuse, misappropriation of property, and abandonment of an incapacitated person. I sentence her to 3 years of incarceration in a semi-open regime, convertible to community service upon good behavior. Furthermore, I order the full restitution of all misappropriated property, including the residential house, furniture, and personal belongings of the victim. The defendant shall also pay compensation for moral damages in the amount of $50,000, payable in installments, according to her financial ability. Jessica closed her eyes, her head bowing. I further order that the defendant be included in the Elder Abuse Registry, prohibiting her from working with or residing with persons over the age of 60 for a period of 10 years. Her name will appear in public records of persons convicted of crimes against the elderly. The judge banged her gavel. Case closed. Helen began to cry softly. Ethan hugged her, fighting back his own tears. Sarah was behind them, her hands on both their shoulders, also emotional. Mr. Wallace simply nodded, satisfied with a job well done. Across the room, Jessica was led away by a bailiff to sign documents and receive instructions on serving her sentence. She didn't look back. She didn't try to apologize. She simply left, defeated not just by the law, but by her own inability to feel genuine remorse. In the months that followed, a lot changed. The Blue House was legally returned to Helen. Ethan, with the help of friends from the army and neighbors, who now understood the truth, renovated the place. They painted the walls a cheerful yellow, fixed the gate, and planted flowers in the garden. They transformed that space of trauma into a space of new beginnings. Helen decided not to live there alone. She invited Mrs. Davis, who was struggling financially, to share the house. The two became companions, looking after each other, sharing stories and comfortable silences. Ethan set up a small room for himself out back and started sleeping there on weekends, keeping his job at the gas station but always present. The Extended Hands non-profit used the case, with Helen's permission, to create awareness campaigns about elder abuse, without exposing names or faces, but telling the story as an example of what happens in the shadows, behind closed doors and social smiles. Sarah became a close family friend, always stopping by for dinner or coffee. Jessica served 6 months in a semi-open facility before her sentence was converted to community service. She now worked at a homeless shelter, ironically caring for the very people she would have once ignored. Ethan found out by chance, through acquaintances. He didn't feel anger anymore, no hatred, just a distant sadness for a life wasted on cruelty. Helen never spoke her name again. She had completely turned the page. A year after the trial, on a hot January afternoon, Ethan was in the yard painting the fence when Helen came out with a tray, iced tea and warm corn muffins. "Thanks, Mum." She sat next to him in the shade of the apple tree. "Son, there's something I've been wanting to tell you for a long time." "Go ahead." "I've forgiven you. Completely. For believing her. For not seeing. For leaving me. I know you carry that guilt, but I want you to know that you don't have to anymore." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. "I should have noticed, Mum. I should have. You were living your life, following your dreams. That's not a crime. The crime was hers. Hers alone." Helen held his face in her hands. And if anything good came out of all this, it was learning the value of presence, not just being physically near, but really being there, present, attentive, caring. "That's what I'm going to be from now on. Present." She smiled. "I know, son. You already are. That night Ethan took off the locket he never removed from his neck. He opened it and read the letter for the 1,000th time. The words were still the same, but their meaning was infinitely deeper now. Love isn't measured in pretty words written on paper. It's measured in staying when it's hard, in fighting when it's easier to give up, in believing when everyone doubts, in giving a voice to the silenced. He looked out the window and saw Helen in the garden, watering the flowers she had planted. She was humming an old song, the same one she used to sing when Ethan was a child. The sound mingled with the chirping of birds and the distant noise of the city. It was a sound of peace, of new beginnings, of life insisting on blooming even after the storm. Ethan thought of the other Helens still out there, the muffled voices, the hidden pains, the stories that would never be told because the shame, the fear, or the disbelief were too great. He thought about how society fails to protect its most vulnerable, how easy it is to believe in appearances and ignore silent screams. But he also thought about how a single person doing the right thing can change everything, like Sarah, who didn't give up on finding Helen, like Mr. Wallace, who took the case for free, like Mrs. Robinson, who brought the recordings even though she was ashamed of not having acted sooner. How every small act of courage added up to restore one woman's dignity. And he thought of himself, the young man who left for the army full of dreams, thinking he was doing what was best for his mother, and the man who returned transformed by pain but strengthened by the fight, who learned that caring isn't just about providing financially. It's about being present, it's about listening, it's about believing, it's about fighting. Helen came in through the back door, bringing with her the smell of damp earth and flowers. "Son, Mrs. Davis is making that chicken and dumplings you love. Come eat." Ethan put the locket away and stood up. "I'm coming, Mum." As he walked to the kitchen, listening to the laughter of Helen and Mrs. Davis mix with the sound of the pot on the stove, Ethan felt a deep peace settle in his chest. It wasn't a perfect fairy tale ending. Helen still had scars. She still woke up sometimes in the middle of the night, startled, thinking she was back at the landfill. She still trembled when she saw women who looked like Jessica on the street. But she was alive, she was safe, she was loved, and that, after everything, was more than enough. It was everything, because in the end, the story wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about rescue, about restoration, about the incredible strength of love when it translates into action, about how silence can kill, but the truth can bring you back to life. And as they ate dinner together that night, the three of them sharing stories and dreams, Ethan knew he had done the right thing, that he had honored the love he had always felt for his mother, that he had turned pretty words written on paper into concrete, tangible, transformative actions. The locket was still on his chest, the letter was still inside, but now it was more than a promise, it was a testament, a reminder that love without presence is just intention, and intention without action is just wind. Helen looked at her son and smiled. The smile Ethan thought he would never see again. The smile that was worth every day of struggle, every sleepless night, every tear shed. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that wherever life took them from here, they would go together. Because he had learned the most important lesson of all. That family isn't just blood. It's a choice. It's presence. It's a fight. It's a love that proves itself every day, not in words, but in being there. Simply there. Present. Whole. Real. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Ethan and Helen has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved, if you recognized yourself in this fight for dignity, if you felt the strength of love that translates into action, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what part of this journey resonated with you the most. Every day we bring intense stories like this one, stories that reveal the deepest side of the human soul, that expose hidden pains and celebrate the courage of those who fight. Stories that remind us to look around, to pay attention to those beside us, to not let silence hide cries for help. We'll see you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and make you reflect on life. Until next time.